today. This is season 3, episode 1 for the American Association of Food Safety and Public Health Veterinarians. And this is our podcast slash YouTube channel that talks about the very many career opportunities in veterinary medicine. And today I'd like to introduce Dr. Mike Murphy, who is the leader of the AVMA Division of Animal and Public Health. And we're going to start out by talking from the very beginning of his veterinary career and how he got there, because it was a really circuitous route from what I could see on your bio on the AVMA website. So do you want to tell me about what got you into veterinary medicine and where you went to school and all that good stuff? Years are good for this part because it's very impressive to see that we're still functioning at this age.
Yeah. So I'm a Texas A&M grad from 1981. My undergraduate work was biochemistry, which at A&M at the time was in the chemistry department. So I worked there and got accepted into vet school and went. And while I was there, I lived on someone's property and fixed fence and fed cattle and that sort of thing to keep the costs down.
Mm-hmm.
And worked in the veterinary diagnostic laboratory in the toxicology section because I had more of a chemistry biochem background.
Mm-hmm.
So when I graduated, there was an offer to stay there, and I said, no, I want to go practice.
As
So
do we all, pretty
I went
much.
to the most mixed animal practice I could find, which was in northeastern Oklahoma. People sold their cattle in Joplin,
Okay.
little bitty towns. Well, they might be bigger now, but anyway, small towns. And I got a really good exposure to um, kind of a mixed practice because most of the folks that were in that area made their living off the land. So it was very rural practice. But there was a lake nearby. And so folks had their weekend homes and they'd bring their pets there. So we had both the little bit of companion animal and
Mm-hmm.
more food animal type stuff.
So in some ways that was really good for you to stick your foot in the pond, so to speak, and have a variety to work on
Correct.
from the beginning. Mm-hmm.
I agree, and that was what I wanted, and that's what I got. And whether for better or for worse, it was all wonderful experience. And the plan was to do that for a few years. And another person took the research associate position that they asked me about before I left, and she wound up her fiance at the time wound up getting an offer in Louisiana, and so she left with a master's rather than finishing up her PhD. And so then that slot opened, and I went back to A&M to work on a PhD as a research associate in the Texas Veterinary Medical Diagnostic Laboratory. So
So that's it. That's amazing. What was your PhD project, or what was it in?
toxicology.
Okay.
And I did a couple of projects. One had to do with ethylene glycol in dogs. One was a toxic plant. But the thesis itself was on a long-acting anticoagulant rodenticide called brodifacoum,
Mm-hmm.
which is still on the market today. It was when some of the newer and better and longer lasting, more potent second generation, quote unquote, second generation anticoagulant rodenticides came out. And there was some need to educate people on it, that it wasn't just warfarin with respect to treating the animals and doing the analytical chemistry to demonstrate they were there, and then determine the amount of time that vitamin K therapy may be needed with some of the more potent and longer lasting products.
Right, if we can even save their lives. So at that time, was toxicology even a boarded specialty?
It was.
Mm-hmm.
Um, And my major professor in the vet school was a boarded veterinary toxicologist. Um, I had I think he was boarded public health guy on the committee, and then two folks who I worked with all the time I was there, and they're fabulous mentors. One was a PhD analytical chemist, and then the other a animal scientist, weed scientist. Neither one of them were veterinarians, but they were very impactful and very helpful part of my education. And I'm still appreciative for them, helping me learn about stuff that I didn't know about.
Yeah. So did you end up getting boarded in toxicology?
I did. Got boarded in vet tox in, I think, around 87.
Okay. It took several years, but then again, you had that little deviation first in private
Yeah.
practice when I looked
Yeah.
at getting boarded in toxicology, even at my advanced age, I thought, oh, that would be awesome. And then it was something like 5 years. And I was, so it does take that long.
It's
It
a bit
really
of
does.
time,
Yeah.
and it's a broad swath of potential toxins, from mycotoxins and toxic plants to pharmaceuticals and pesticides to household chemicals,
Hmm.
et cetera, et cetera. And so it's um, it's very broad, and folks go into it, and some folks go in to do like a PhD and you go deep in a narrow area, but veterinary diagnostic laboratories, poison control centers that take animal calls, are examples of folks that see just a huge variety of stuff all the time. And so the exam touches on that, uh,
Hmm.
which takes a little time for folks to get that in their head, I guess.
Yeah, yeah. So it was fascinating to read everything on the toxicology website. So but really that's incredible. So starting out so early. And so again, like you said, you guys are on the forefront of any potential toxin situations. So then what happened after you accomplished that?
So when I graduated in 1987, I interviewed with a variety of places and wound up taking an assistant professor position at the University of Minnesota,
Okay.
uh,
Mhm.
which is where I am now. I'm talking to you from Minnesota today. I don't know if you'll probably edit that out, but anyway, and that position was an appointment in the veterinary diagnostic laboratory for clinical and diagnostic tox work, and an assistant professor in the vet school. So taught toxicology to veterinary students, and
Mhm.
we had a graduate program, taught grad students, and did a little bit of more applied type research.
So
So it
you
was
did still have exposure to clinical cases because of the vet
correct.
school.
Yeah,
Um,
we had an necropsy floor. We had, I used to be able to tell you off the top of my head what the percentages were, but it was 50-50 to 60-40 in any given year on the service work versus the teaching and research work.
okay.
And um, thousands of samples and cases and thousands of phone calls. And then once email got to be popular, then it got to be, thousands of emails and whatnot.
Emails.
But
Yeah.
so in teaching the vet students in Minnesota, and then when they were out in practice, I think that really was helpful in fostering the communication there when something came up. I mean, a poisoning case is not like your everyday practice of vet medicine sort of thing. And
Mhm.
some of the more common things I emphasized more while they were in vet school. So I think they were exposed to those, but then let them know that other things existed. Kind of the 80-20 rule, 80% of what you see is 20% of what's really out there, and then vice versa. So you
Mhm.
know that there's someone else to check with on, what else it could be.
Mhm.
And I think that was a very good system in talking to folks when they needed it and helped them. And so it was great.
Well, you
Um,
can also guide them with what kind of samples to take of whatever at
yes.
that point. Whereas right now, I feel like a lot of our clinicians end up reaching straight for animal poison control and having, a quick conversation there. But generally, those are more of the, oh, I saw my animal eat this substance. But you're talking about a situation where there's a suspect poisoning, but then or exposure to toxin that nobody could figure out for sure where it is or what it is and so on. So those are two
Or,
very different approaches, right?
well, they are, and historically have been, but there's a lot more overlap these days. Like there are two back at last century, there were human poison control centers that would take animal calls, and I carried a beeper for one of them. Um, and there are, that's kind of gone by the wayside. There are two major um, poison
Poison
control
control pumps.
centers, one in Minneapolis and one in Illinois, that take animal calls. And there's a very, very good network between the veterinary toxicologists in academia and in diagnostic labs and the poison control centers.
Okay.
And so actually folks can, and with now with the advent of like virtual things like we're doing now, folks can spend some time with folks in, one of the other places. If you're in a poison center, you can interact with the diagnostic labs and vice versa. And frankly, with folks in industry a little bit. So it's all a very synergistic kind of relationship. And I think even the president right now of the board of vet tox is in one of the poison control centers. So it's,
Oh,
and
okay.
now is teaching the vet students in Minnesota. So it's,
Mhm.
you are correct that there are different perspectives to start with, but there's been a lot of overlap now, and technology and virtual visiting and whatever has helped that.
Oh, that's fantastic. I was not aware of that to understand that there could be that additional resource in terms of contacting whatever toxicology labs there
Yeah.
were. So
Well, and,
that's
and like so many other disciplines, there are list servers that are out, and there are a variety of folks on the list servers for vet talks. And
Mhm.
it's even international now. So there are folks in Australia and Europe and whatever. And it's a very good network of communicating, with the folks who are trained and are interested in trying to stay up on something. And now as some of us baby boomers kind of get more towards the end, and the new people come in and they'll ask a question, and you say, well, yeah, 25 years ago I saw this, and it helps them, it helps
Right.
give them an idea. And it may or may not be true, but you have a variety of folks with experience helping to say, these are some things to think about.
And it's almost like you could be at any level if you have that interest, because I have seen the
Yeah,
two call centers advertise and say, hey, you can be a clinical veterinarian and we'll take you on. And so
correct.
it's not like you have to have an advanced degree, but you might decide you love it, and all of a sudden you find yourself pursuing that and other avenues. So
Correct. Correct.
that's encouraging.
Practice is a very good additional foundation for folks doing a variety of, more specialized, more focused areas. And that's true in the tox area as well.
Mhm.
And some people have gone on to get boarded, and there are a variety, a lot that way, and some um, have not. You're right.
Sure. And so, how long did you end up teaching over there at, and that's the vet school at Minnesota. So where is that located?
Correct. It's in It's on the St. Paul campus. It's technically in St. Paul, Minnesota, on the St. Paul
Okay.
campus of the University of Minnesota. So
Mhm.
I arrived there in 1987, and I took a position with FDA in 2009. So it's roughly 22 years there.
Okay.
And then I was with FDA Center for Vet Medicine from it was right about 10 years. It was August of 2009 through August of 2019.
So 2009 was a couple of years after melamine. So how did that affect anything going on in terms of the way the Center for Veterinary Medicine was run at the FDA? Or I want to say think the I think I saw something perhaps at the pet owner portal and vet portal to report suspected
Yeah.
cases really became um, perhaps more useful or even was developed at that time.
Yeah. So that probably has something to do with FDA having a position and a surge hiring that I moved, to make the move. Um, I had been teaching an elective for graduate students and veterinary students, and I don't know that we had any undergraduates, on an introduction to regulatory affairs. So I was talking about drugs and devices and how they're regulated in kind of a broad way at the University of Minnesota for about a decade, every other year for about a decade when the triazine issue hit. And so part of this listserv that I alluded to earlier, there was a communication between FDA's Center for Vet Medicine, the vet tox people there, and
Hmm.
folks in the diagnostic labs, veterinary diagnostic labs and poison control centers. So um, we got little updates, and we were kind of not at liberty to share them too much with the public, but just try and help out. It was a brain trust, kind of approach. In the spring of 2007, and with I had a senior rotation of half a dozen students. Sorry, this is a rambling story, but I'll get to a
Hmm.
point in a minute.
No, that's great.
Half
Go
a
ahead.
dozen students that were on a senior rotation, and every morning they would ask me about it. So it was every day for a couple of weeks. And to not break the confidentiality that we agreed to on the list server, I said, "What did Katie Couric say on the news last night?" And then we could talk about that. And so that
Hmm.
was
So the example of what she would say would be what?
she was just announcing whatever she was reporting that was added to it that day. And it was, as you kind of alluded to, it was national news for um, a few weeks until it kind of got figured out.
Oh,
And
for the melamine as
right.
the brands got expanded. Yeah,
Yeah.
on my side, on my side as a clinician, I just remember getting like sometimes 3 emails a day from AVMA with an updated list of
Yeah.
brands, and it
Yeah.
wasn't lot numbers. It was brands
Correct.
of pet food. And I remember at one point just looking at it and thinking, where does this end, if it even ends, and seeing that everything was affected. And it was like watching a tsunami wave approaching.
It
You
was,
knew it
yeah.
was coming and it kept getting bigger as it got closer. That really, and at that point, people were just stunned that this could be happening in such a widespread fashion. So you were sort of in on that level too, because you
Yeah.
were interacting in behind the scenes. Okay.
So yeah, because of that listserv and because of the relationship that existed with the vet tox folks, um, from annual meetings at the vet diagnostic labs and whatnot, there was a lab in Guelph that was doing a lot of work on it, and Davis and um, folks in industry, obviously, it was a very collaborative. And one of the days we came upon a publication that looked, how melamine and cyanuric acid could go together. And in one of the labs with a uh, X-ray crystallography device was able to demonstrate that that's what the crystals were out of the kidneys of some of the animals they had. And somebody
Once
else
they
was able
figured
to,
out not to send samples in formalin.
yeah, yeah. And
That
somebody
was the
else
thing.
was able to like dose a very, very small number of animals from the welfare and all that standpoint, but show that the toxicosis was synergistic when you had both of them rather than one individually. And then that information was shared back with the toxicologists at FDA. And then that led to, I think you already interviewed Renata, and that
Yeah.
led to a lot of recognition and building and equipment and expertise in CVM's Office of Research.
Mm.
And they were able to then demonstrate that to what was going on. And then people had both regulator and regulatee and diagnostic labs had an analytical chemistry tool to determine what you referred to earlier on the tsunami in terms of what lots or batches or, how to get your hand around whether
Mhm.
um, it was in a particular lot or batch of product.
Well, I think that once it was identified too, the the pet food companies were able to do, a recall based on knowing what the substance was, what it contaminated, and then follow back to the origin. And so that's where they, as you said, began to isolate lot numbers. And I remember particularly the only thing I had for sale in my clinic at the time, so very many years ago, was the Hills products. And I remember them saying it was just in MD. So we were able to just grab stuff and just be
Right.
relieved it wasn't in anything
Yeah, so
else.
those folks that were following good manufacturing practice and knew which lots of ingredients went into which batches of
Yeah,
food and
in order
whatnot,
to follow their
once they
recall
had a
process.
tool to check for it, they could trace back
Mhm.
and demonstrate to state and federal regulators where it was and where it wasn't. And then I think that was the turning point
It
on
was, yeah.
getting it under control and then helping to educate folks
Mhm.
and the public, and it ultimately got to where it wasn't on the nightly news every night after that.
Took a
But
bit,
it
yeah.
Go ahead. But it gave, I'm finally now getting back to your original question. Getting um the number of adverse events reported to FDA, I was told, was on the order of 16 or 17 or 18,000 folks calling in about either, concerns about that pet food, which was a number larger than they'd had on other issues. And so that kind of gave attention in, which there was some surge hire, there was some funding approved for what was called surge hiring um, in the next fiscal year or two. And that's part of the program that
Hired
I
for
was
it.
hired under in 2009. So I'm trying to
So how did you
finally
hear
bring the
about
story
it?
back to the question you
Yeah.
actually asked.
But what's interesting is how did you hear about that? How did you search for that, or it was just through the
What?
grapevine because you were working with these people?
Yeah, so that's a very good question, and probably not the most helpful question for the reason that you're doing this interview. But one of the toxicologists who had hiring authority, had a slot, had spoken for me in my introduction to regulatory affairs course a few years earlier, and knew that I was doing that. And so he thought it was a good fit with the practical clinical part and the laboratory investigation part, but with exposure to the fact that regulations exist. And I think
Yeah.
that was
Well,
his thought on pulling it in.
that actually makes sense and is helpful because it reminds people that it's not about necessarily looking on job boards. It's about networking. It's about putting yourself out there and people recognizing your name. It's about interacting on different
Yeah,
levels with different organizations, businesses, beyond just the scope of what your job is. And you were doing that. And so
correct,
you're, yeah.
correct. But your point is very well taken, and I would look at USA Jobs now, and I didn't know it existed at the time, which is your point. And I think there
Yeah.
are a lot of those types of positions that veterinarians would qualify for if they even knew they were being advertised.
Yeah, it's very tricky when you go on to like USA Jobs and it may not say specifically that it is only veterinary, but they might mention it as the list of types of um, professions, let's say, that would be eligible to work this job. Or even just knowing what you know as a veterinarian, there it might say you have to have experience or degree up to a certain point, but you look at it and you go, I know this stuff. And so apply.
Correct. Yeah,
Yeah, yeah.
yeah,
It's not
exactly.
necessarily a matter that they're going, this is a specific veterinary job. So I think that's a good point too, to say, well, you can go on to these other ones. And then look at these job boards that are not necessarily mentioned in our initial job board we all look at as AVMA. So, I mean, yeah,
Yeah.
that's the place you go to first. And then quite often it doesn't even begin to address all the other types of careers that are available out there for veterinarians. But you have to think about the other opportunities. And so at that point, when you had reached that point, it was around 2009. And then what types of organizations were you a member of at that time?
In 2009, I was an AVMA member. I was a member of the board of vet tox um, group, and there's a Academy of Veterinarian Clinical and Veterinary Toxicologist, which is a little broader organization than just the vet tox board itself, and American Association of Veterinary Laboratory Diagnosticians, which is the Veterinary Diagnostic Lab
Which what you
Association,
did.
and so many folks, but those were all groups that I was working in, and my superiors supported and encouraged and supported the notion to
Mhm.
like go and meet the other people doing the same thing that you're doing, and that's the networking and the synergy that frankly I think was pivotal in solving the triazine contamination as quickly as it was solved, or it was
Mhm.
identified, in terms of the issue. Um, so I was hired into the Office of Surveillance and Compliance at the Center for Vet Medicine at FDA, and spent uh, basically the first 5 years doing what I'll call scientific support on enforcement actions. Other people did the inspections and the actual decisions on what the enforcement actions would be, but it was just
Mhm.
essentially it was analogous to writing a report on whether it's a clinical case report or, more to my experience, the veterinary diagnostic lab reports on, do you have the toxin? Do you have the pathology? Does the history fit it and whatnot? And, does this make sense or not?
So basically reviewing
Correct.
the data.
It,
Okay.
it, doing the differential diagnosis and applying it and put it in writing for folks that were deciding whether they had a good or not a good or strong or not strong case with respect to an enforcement action is a good part of what I did. There were a few other questions, but they were along the same kind of lines, just applying diagnostic and reasoning skills. And I think being in practice and having been in a diagnostic lab thinking of the other potential differentials was helpful in thinking about other options that may or may not actually be appropriate in the particular case.
Yeah, that is exactly what comes to mind when you talk about the fact that we have to have that exposure to clinical medicine and how helpful it is. Don't let anybody ever feel like that is a reason to hold you back from exploring other things. It actually is something that is important because it helps you to
It,
be successful in another iteration of
agree,
your career.
agree. It's a very useful skill, expertise, reasoning thing. Doing it in a regulated environment is, there is a learning curve there on getting that, on how it fits on the regulation and what the words
Oh
are and
yeah.
whether, it
Well,
meets
I was
it.
in the Army for 12
But
years.
okay, well, there you go.
Oh,
Yeah.
government regulations. Whew. Yeah.
Well, but
So,
it's important that it's assigning, well, it's the delegated authority from Congress, and whether you're acting within the scope of that authority and whether you're answering the question that needs to be answered for the enforcement action. So anyway, sorry, that's too much, but
oh no.
uh,
Oh, that's perfectly fine. Um, I I think that is a very good explanation of how important it is at
it,
that point.
I'm, uh, I appreciate both sides of it more now than I did before. I'll put it that way, so.
Sure.
And then the second half, I was reassigned to the office of the director, and there was an initiative or an expansion on the initiative of antimicrobial stewardship. And so I was basically used as an educator to do outreach to veterinarians and feed manufacturers and producers on something called the Veterinary Feed Directive rule. And so did a lot of traveling, and my education experience and academic experience was useful there. And communicating back and forth on questions that folks had, and helping people understand what FDA was doing and was not doing, and bringing back, many questions of I can't say it, implementation. Finally, I got it out. Folks saying, well, if I'm going to do this, how do I do it right in these particular circumstances? And we did a fair amount of that, but I got to interact then with a lot of the producer groups, some of the feed manufacturer associations that I may have had some interaction with before, but it gave me more interaction then.
Well, I feel
Can you
like
still
at
hear
that
me? Or yeah,
no,
okay.
no, you're good. I just
Okay.
had a little technical difficulty. We're fine. Well, I think people don't really comprehend what goes on behind the scenes, and there's so many levels of what's happening at the Center for Veterinary Medicine at the FDA. So that kept you super involved, and for you said 5 years,
It
and
was
was that pretty much your time there?
correct.
Mhm.
Sorry, I'm going a little bit off on a tangent. Many of those outreach meetings were done in conjunction with folks at USDA, and
Mhm.
sometimes there were other agency folks at those meetings. So it it was a very good synergistic relationship with USDA folks who also have a part of the antimicrobial stewardship piece, and interacting with other folks with other federal agencies at that point was good and helpful and expansive. So some of that there were questions of, what's the scope of regulatory authority, and when are you at the edge of, and when do you cross over into the practice of veterinary medicine? And
Okay.
I
Mhm.
think, I when I was in Minnesota, I served for a time on the board of veterinary medicine there.
Mhm.
And so had a little bit of experience from complaints and looking at that. And it was just helpful thinking about kind of, where are the lines, or at least where do the lines, where are the hash marks, the left and right hash mark anyway, whether you know exactly where the line is.
Mhm.
And AVMA had an opening for the director position in the Division of Animal and Public Health. And so I became aware of that and wound up applying, and have been with AVMA, I guess it's about 4.5 or so years now, doing that, interacting. Our division, well, the policy unit, Gail Golab is my boss. The policy unit
Oh,
interacts
okay.
with the,
I recognize that name.
yeah, folks in the profession, folks in federal agencies, a variety of them, and we have them on as in a lot of our volunteer groups as what we call invited representatives or technical advisors. So the practitioners that are volunteering for, whether it's antimicrobials or aquatic medicine or all the other public health and all the other entities, that we have folks from the agencies with the technical expertise of what the guidance or regulation means in the context that the practitioners are discussing it.
Mhm.
And that was a role I served when I was with FDA, and then so I'm now on the other side with AVMA.
Mhm. Yeah, and then, I actually worked with you because I'm the alternate to the delegate for the food safety the food safety, committee,
Advisory committee,
advisory committee,
FSAC.
yes.
Yeah.
And that covers not just human food safety, but pet food safety.
Yes.
And so, that's how I snagged you in for this interview. I also went over and was looking to see, which one of the folks who were on that advisory committee, were members of our organization. And so you had not mentioned earlier, back in 2005, I guess, that you were a member of this association, American Association of Food Safety and Public Health Veterinarians. So I know that there was um, a, a combination, the two organizations of food hygiene and then public health veterinary came together. I think it was around 2007. That was before my time. But at any rate, when did you join this association?
I, I'm embarrassed to tell you, but I honestly don't remember.
Uh, but
Uh, I
obviously it's
think
applicable
I
because we're
think
food
when the
safety.
VFD rule,
Mhm.
right, no, agree. I realize you're gonna probably have to cut this out because I don't have an answer for you. I'm sorry.
Not at all.
When, and I don't remember now. So one, thank you for reminding me, and you're a very good example of the networking that happens. And we met because you're volunteering for one of AVMA's entities, and now I'm doing the interview with you. So thank you for that. While the antimicrobial resistance outreach was going on, there were a variety of groups that reached out and asked for essentially the presentation that I was giving to others. And I'm
Okay.
confident that I gave it. I I think I wound up doing 150 or more of them. And so my apology that I don't have them all top of mind at the moment anymore, but folks that were interested in public health and working on their, specialty development, the antimicrobial stewardship was one of the topics that I was asked to speak on, and it was more than one group, and I just don't remember who they all are at the moment.
Oh, sure.
My
Well,
bad.
again, like I said, it's very applicable because we are food safety and public health, which is
Yes.
your
Yes.
deal. So at 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 this point, here we've reached something again, which I think we started our conversation about, and that is how veterinarians end up still being useful and productive within our career for so long.
Right. And I agree. And I think that folks that have practiced have, you're doing applied medicine in a very small business way, which makes you think about a whole lot of factors that are important. But they're also useful, whether it's technical services or research in animal industry, or whether it's state or federal government or associations and whatnot. And so I would that the knowledge and the expertise of practicing uh, channeled in any of these areas, like I say, industry, government, associations, whatnot,
Yeah,
is
it's remarkable because
useful.
yeah, and we also don't have to necessarily move because we can do things virtually for the most part.
I think that's an opportunity that's been afforded this century that was not as convenient last century, and it allows the tapping in of the expertise and intellect of folks that have years of experience to help assist and help train and help pass the baton on.
Exactly, yes. So would you be open to folks reaching out and, for with any kind of questions or like how do you get into this or, what does that involve? And you've covered so much. And if so, what would work for you? Would it be your LinkedIn to talk via LinkedIn or email or what?
I'm an old curmudgeon. I don't have social media. I don't do LinkedIn. I'm sorry.
No, a lot
Just
of people are using that now.
my email address at AVMA is
Okay.
yeah, you have it.
Yeah,
That's the
I'll
best
put
way
that
to get
on
a hold
there.
of me.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I'll put that in the show notes along with the stuff I lifted off the AVMA site that talks about your very many faceted career. It sounds to me like you are still keeping your fingers in and on the pulse of things you've done previously and maintaining your connections even at this point.
It yeah, one of the advantages, I mean, with the position with AVMA, as you well know, again, as being on one of our entities, FSAC, is maintaining interactions with not only practitioners that are volunteering, but state and federal agencies, and we have industry reps on as well. So it does help foster the communication, which I think it's always been important and even increasingly important these days of just being able to talk with folks, even if you don't come down in the same place.
Mhm. Well, do you have any final words of advice or suggestions of any
No,
sort to, veterinarians, particularly not necessarily just clinicians that are looking for a career change, but maybe even the youngsters who are coming out of vet school and thinking they prefer being into, just bypass clinical medicine.
I,
What kind of suggestions do you have?
I think a, a veterinary medicine degree is is, if not the best, among the very best broad-based biomedical sciences backgrounds that you can have. And if you practice, you've applied it and you see it as, you know, the small business aspect of it in terms of practical decisions that get made and the communication with your client to really, with them, decide what their medical path for their animal is. And those are very useful skills that you probably, none of us appreciate them when we're doing them, but they're very helpful in all kinds of other areas, education, industry. We didn't mention an industry job board, but you know, that's probably something we can figure out. And then, like I said, don't dismiss state or federal government. There's
a lot of opportunities,
there's
very much.
opportunities there
Yeah.
that you're well suited for.
Yeah, well, I do want to give a shout out to the fact that we now, with our organization, have a new website that does boast a job board.
Yeah.
So we are trying to encourage people to send jobs over, and either I or Catherine, our executive VP, will post them, or it's very easy to post on your own of any kind of jobs. And we're just trying to support our colleagues in the profession so that they see opportunity, they see hope, they see the fact that they're not stuck and in a position where they feel perhaps victimized or overloaded or overworked or burnt out or what have you. And I think that's really important to get that out into the world right now, given the fact that veterinarians are struggling. And I just believe that they will do well to listen to some of our interviews and see the fantastic careers people have had with, as you said, don't discount or dismiss your clinical experience and your veterinary knowledge. It prepares you for so much more. So thank you.
Well,
For,
I would certainly, you may or may not use this. I would certainly consider looking at other aspects on how you can use your training and education before deciding to get out of the profession entirely and do a different kind of job, because
right.
you have
Yeah.
you've invested and you don't appreciate how much expertise you have. So I would agree with you on checking that out.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you so much. And I am delighted. I feel now that we've gotten to know one another and we're friends. So I look forward to talking to you in the future as well. And I'm always delighted to talk to another veterinarian who's worked at the Center for Veterinary Medicine at the FDA, because I think it's just fascinating what you're trying to do there in terms of supporting the public at large, as well as the veterinarians out there who are working every day on the front lines. So very cool to hear about that.
As one of my previous supervisors there said, the Center for Vet Medicine is a microcosm of everything that FDA does. It's just for animals.
Just for animals, yes. That's a good way to put it. Well,
For
thanks so
non-human animals, I guess.
Yeah, exactly. So thank you so much. It was a pleasure talking to you, and I will catch you at the next meeting, if not beforehand.
Thank
So
you.
take care. Have a great
Have a
one.
good day.
You too. Bye.